Yes.
Get ready to take control of your own financial destiny. It's time to build your dream business. Welcome to the Empowered Entrepreneur.
This just got exciting.
With your host, Spider Graham. Your education starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the broadcast. This is Spider Graham, and this time around, I want to talk about how we can effectively communicate with the people that we're trying to reach. Now, obviously, as marketers, a big part of what we have to do is communicate with people that we know are the people who want to hear from us, the people who most are interested in what we have to sell to them, the people who most have a need for what it is that we provide to the world. Now, this is an important distinction, by the way, because oftentimes when you talk to marketers and you say, who's your target audience for this product, they'll say something like, everybody, which is not true. And all you have to do is look around the world a little bit and realize that there's no consensus on pretty much anything. And I think even if you were just trying to sell clean air and potable water, you'd still find a few people who just wouldn't want to take part in that process. So there's no such thing as a universal audience that you're going to reach. And I laugh every so often, and I've thought this thought myself in the past, where someone will say, if I could just reach 1% of all the people who live in China, I would be a zillionaire, which might be true, but how are you going to reach 1% of all the people who live in China? Because, first of all, do 1% of the people who live in China want what you're offering? And here's the reality. And yes, when we have our businesses and we have marketing plans and we have products and services, we have the tendency to become very intimate with them. In a lot of ways, we fall in love with our own stuff, which is, there's nothing wrong with this. It's a necessary part to sell it, but we end up with this kind of understanding of our product that's so in depth that we believe that everybody in the world will see it through our eyes. They're going to want it as much as we do. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, which is fine. By the way, this is fine. So the good news is it takes a lot of the pressure off of us of trying to reach everybody. And instead, now we can turn around and say, all right, how do I reach the people I need to reach? How do I reach the people who are most interested in buying from me? How do I reach the people for which my product or service fills a need, solves a problem? So this is a good place to start, by the way. Now, I think we need to back it up just a little bit and kind of look at the idea of how we communicate with people anyway. I'm just going to give you kind of a quick overview. And by the way, if you go online to spidergraham.com, if you're a member, you can pick up a free copy of my book on interactive advertising. And it covers a lot of these things. There's some great charts and graphs that will kind of show you what we're talking about here. But for the most part, when we talk about communicating with other people, it's really an exchange of information that we're dealing with. Now, let's just kind of break this down for a moment, all right? So you're hanging out with your best friend. And your best friend and you have a long history. And as a result, it's very easy to communicate. And probably the reason you're best friends in the first place is because it was very easy to communicate with one another. Okay, get a little easy. It's just, hey, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. So we have this conversation that takes place, and the conversation is really give and take. You say something, that person processes what you said, they create some sort of feedback, and they kick it back at you, and you go back and forth. Okay, now this is normal, interactive, and interpersonal communication. And also, what's also happening all the time that we're having this level of communication with somebody is that there's a type of physical communication that's taking place. Okay, there's what we call visual feedback, and a lot of it has to do with what we call body language. So I'm having a conversation with my best friend, we're chatting about stuff, he's laughing, I'm laughing, I know by looking at his face he's having a good time, he knows by looking at my face I'm having a good time, and so we understand kind of where we are with our mood and how well the conversation is flowing back and forth. But let's say we're not having a good time. Let's say we're having a disagreement, right? Best friends have disagreements from time to time. And you're saying, hey, I really think we should do this. Well, I don't want to do that. That's not how I want to do it. Okay. So we're going back and forth and we're exchanging information. We have information that's flowing back and forth between us. But there's also, like I said, this second level of feedback. And I'm looking at his body language, has his arms crossed across his chest, which is very defensive posture. He's scowling at me, which I don't have to be a genius to figure out means that, we're not on the same page here. And so we're going back and forth. Now, this is normal. Once again, this is how human beings communicate with one another, and that's fine. The challenge we run into is that when we take this model, this idea of how we communicate with one another, and we put it into an online environment, well, suddenly we're in a position where it's really hard to have the same kind of conversation for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's really hard to know what the other person is saying back to us in a lot of cases. right? So I put something online, I create a web page, and I say, hey, welcome to my web page. I hope you like my products and services. But I don't know what the other side of the conversation looks like. I don't have the same level of visual feedback either. I don't know if someone's looking at my offer going, wow, this is really cool, or if they're looking at it going, and moving on to something else. So I need to think ahead. I need to think about, first of all, the conversation I want to have with these people, and second of all, how I can create some sort of a feedback loop to get a better sense of whether or not I'm having the conversation I want. So the two things I want to talk about in today's podcast. One of this, how do we reach the right people? How do we find out what that target audience is? And the second is, how do we create messages that will allow us to meet the needs of that target audience, to resonate with them personally, so that they become more than just an audience and become prospects and customers for us. So let's talk about the idea of reaching the right audience, first of all. Now, the reality of reaching the right audience is that most of us, at least to a certain degree, when we have a business, know who it is we're selling to. If maybe not in specific terms, but at least in general terms. Okay, now it might be based upon a point of demography. So I have a product for men, or I have a product for women, or I have a product for young people, or I have a product for homeowners, or I have a product for people who own pets, or whatever it is. Okay, so we have at least a breakdown, and we know. So if you don't own a dog, you're not probably going to be interested in my pet shampoo product. Okay, so it helps us narrow it down nicely. So we can at least start there. So my encouragement for anybody who's sitting down and saying, all right, well, I need to get out and communicate with the masses, is to first say, okay, well, first of all, reduce the masses into a manageable group of people. So who is it you're trying to reach, and what is it you're trying to say? So you break this down by asking yourself a bunch of questions. And one of the things we want to be able to do is say, okay, what problem am I solving? Okay. And by the way, everything that we do from a product and service standpoint really does solve a problem. Now, I'm not saying it has to be an earth-shattering problem. It's not like you're saving the world every time someone buys your product, although some of you probably have products that will be a lot closer to being life-saving or world-saving. I'm saying, but sometimes it may be, hey, this makes me happy. That's a problem. I wasn't happy. I bought your product. Now I'm happy. Or, I'm no longer hungry. I bought your product. Now I feel sated. And so that my problem has gone away. Okay. Or my house looks better, whatever it is. Okay. It's not always going to be earth shattering, but it is going to be important to the people making the purchase. So identify what problem you're solving, and then identify, and by the way, be very honest with yourself when you do this. You don't want to be in a position where you're lying to yourself about how wonderful your product is and how much everybody wants it. Kind of put yourself in the position of being a little bit of a naysayer. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who really doesn't care much about your product or service, isn't it intimate or close to them, or even understand the value of them. Okay, you almost have to start there, because it gives you a much better outlook. Because it also allows you to do a better job communicating, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So we go in here and we start to break our audience down, and we start to say, okay, these are the people that I'm trying to reach. Here are the different characteristics that make up the people who are in this audience, whether it's geography or a point of demographics or lifestyle or need or whatever it is. Identify what those things are. And now the second thing you have to ask yourself is, okay, I have a pretty good idea of who these people are. Now, where are they? And especially when we're online, how do we find these people? What websites would we want to make sure that we have ads on? How do we want to reach these people? What communication, if we're using a search engine, for example? If we're going to use Google Ads, how is it we find the people that we're trying to talk to? What language do we use? How are they going to try to find us? So now we start to identify those characteristics as well. So we have two real important things going on here. One is we have, in essence, a dossier, a pedigree of the person we're trying to reach. And the second thing is we have a better understanding of where they are. Now, this really comes back to the whole idea of fish where the fish are, right? If you went out fishing one day and you said, all right, well, any fish is a good fish, well, you could go out and cast your line anywhere you want and probably catch something. But let's say you say, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to catch trout today. That's the goal. Well, the first thing you want to do is go where the trout are, right? So you've identified what your audience is. It's trout. And not only that, now we need to go into this big pond and we say, okay, by the way, the trout like to hang over by this bubbling brook, where it comes off the mountain, because there's lots of oxygen. That's where the trout like to hang out. So I'm going to fish there. I'm not going to fish anywhere or just anywhere. I'm going to go specifically and deal with the trout pond. Okay. Now, maybe a silly analogy, but hopefully you understand what we're getting at here. So now that we've identified those two characteristics, and it's going to be different for each one of us, now we need to think about methodologies. We need to think about how do we best communicate with this audience. Now, here's some challenges, by the way. And one of the things that I want you to think about is how you can be more innovative in how you reach people. Now, we all are dealing with an onslaught of information. We're all dealing with plenty of people who would like a little bit of our attention to tell us about what they bring to the world. And we don't often have the bandwidth for it. And truthfully, a lot of the times, if it doesn't resonate immediately, doesn't catch our attention, it doesn't catch our attention. It kind of filters right through. We don't even really see it. So if you have an ad on a web page or even an ad in a magazine, if it doesn't say to me, this is for you, this is important, this is going to help you with a need, I'm gone, okay? So you want to be innovative. You want to catch people's attention, but you don't want to be obnoxious about it. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. Now, let me just kind of bring another model to your mind when we talk about innovation and how we communicate with everybody else, and especially when we're dealing with a crowded marketplace and lots of people vying for our attention. Let's just say that you walk into a room, a party, and we see this all the time, where people at a party start to talk to one another, and then they start getting excited, and the volume of the conversation gets louder and louder and louder, and now you have a whole room full of people. Everyone's yelling really loudly to be heard over the noise of what's going on in the room. Okay? Now, this is not unlike what happens with advertising. So you start out there, you have an ad, and then somebody else has an ad, your competitor has an ad, and next thing you know, it's just lots and lots of noise, but really hard for the consumer to get a better sense of what it is that you do, because everybody's making so much noise, and consumers have the tendency to just kind of tune out. But the thing is, you don't stand out from the crowd just by yelling louder. You're just making more noise. So how do you stand out from the crowd? Well, in this case, let's say that if you walked into this room and there's this din of conversation, everybody's talking, and you just simply held up a big sign with your message on it and stood at one end of the room. Now your message cuts through all of that noise because everybody in the room could look up and see your sign. It's not competing with the rest of the noise in the room. They look up, they see your sign, they see your message, they can understand something. Okay? It doesn't matter how loud it is in the room. You can have jet engines running. They can still see your sign and understand your point, understand your message. Now let's say you say, wow, this is great. So everybody says, oh, wait a second, this is too loud in here. Let me put up a sign. So now other people get signs. And after a while, you walk into a room and it's just a hubbub of signs. Okay, quiet, but lots and lots of signs and way too many points of view and way too many things to look at and think about. And once again, in a lot of ways, it becomes noise. Okay, it's not auditory noise at this point. It's more visual noise. But it's still going to be a very confusing marketplace. Well, once again, if you walked into this room and everybody's holding up a sign, a single voice would cut through that noise and would stand out from the crowd. Now, I bring this model up because I think it's very important sometimes to look at what it is that you can do to get your message in front of the right people. The challenge that we all face is that it's a crowded marketplace, but there are plenty of people who are able to innovatively get their message out in front of other people by creating ads that are eye-catching or funny or intriguing or meaningful in some profound way. So instead of saying, hey, we need to put up an ad banner, let's just whatever, we'll put something up. Instead, think, how can you stand out from the crowd? What can you do to make sure that your message stands head and shoulders above every other message out there so that people will notice it? Now, we'll talk more about this in a future broadcast, and there's certainly plenty of content on SpiderGram.com that really does talk about these methodologies and how to do it in much more explicit detail. But just something as a food for thought moment to think about the things you have to do. How can you be innovative? So we've identified who our audience is to a certain degree, and now we're thinking about how we can best get the message to them. And this is an important thing that we need to think about as well, is not only the channels that we use and the messages that we use, but how we're going to measure the overall effectiveness of our campaigns. Now, getting back to what I spoke about a little bit earlier, we find ourselves oftentimes in a situation where when we're online, we really don't know what it is that the people we're trying to talk to are doing. We don't know how they're participating in the conversation that we're trying to have with them. So we need to be able to make sure that whenever we create any type of online campaign, that we capture as much feedback as possible from the people that we're interacting with. This is an important consideration because once again, let's just say that I decide that I have a great product. I decide that I know who my audience is, and I'm just going to create some banner ads and put them up on a website. And what I want people to do is I want them to see my ad. I want them to go, "Ooh, that's great." I want them to click on the ad, and I want them to come to a landing page and learn a little bit more about what I offer, and hopefully at that point buy it. Okay, some point of conversion. Well, sounds nice and simple, doesn't it? First of all, the biggest problem you have is how is your ad going to capture the attention of the people you're trying to reach? So, are you putting your ads in the right place where you're going to reach the right people? Okay. And the second question you have to ask yourself is how will you know if you put your ads in the right place to reach the right people? All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. Second, you need to be able to measure if the channel that you're using, whether it's email or whether it's search or whether it's digital display or whether it's anything, is that the channel that's going to allow you to best meet the people that you need to meet? Is that the channel that's going to allow you to get your message in front of the folks who really care? Right. Now, in a lot of cases, we can say, yeah, this is perfect. By the way, you want to measure that as well. You want to find ways of measuring the feedback. When people interact with you, where did this happen? Where did we get the most love? Did our email campaign return a lot of people who said, yeah, this is fantastic? Was it our display advertising? Was it search? So you have to go in there and measure it. Now, I bring this up because in many times during my career, we've gone in, identified who the target audience was, and then we're pleasantly unsurprised sometimes to find out that the people we were trying to target weren't the people that we should have been targeting. We were aiming at the wrong audience. It wasn't really the people that we were trying to reach or we needed to reach. So sometimes you have to step back from your assurity that you really think you know what you're doing here and measure it. So we want to be able to measure the channel. We want to be able to measure the audience. We also want to be able to measure the effectiveness of the message. So whatever the message is that we've created and put into our ads, we want to know, is this resonating? Well, how do we measure a message? Well, in most cases, we measure it through some level of response. So let's just say, for example, I find myself in a situation where I have a campaign that's running, and I want to identify whether or not people are reading and seeing my ad. Well, a simple way to determine whether or not people are seeing the ad is to measure the number of people who click on the ad and come to the landing page. The challenge with that, however, in all truth, is that a lot of people see ads and even read ads and understand ads and get the message and never click on it. So we're going to get an indication through some people who click on the ad that the ad is at least being seen. What we don't see is what happens after that click. Now we have to think about this as well. So let's say that I have a really good ad, okay? It stands out from the crowd. It's got a great message. I'm running it in the right spots. And I find that people are clicking on my ad and going to my landing page or my website. Is this good? Well, yeah, it's a great start, and it's a means to an end, but it's not an end in itself. Because the reality is that the number of people who click on your ad or click on your Google ads or do anything with your advertising is part of the process, but it's not the full process. Because what we really want to measure is what takes place after that. So somebody comes to the landing page. And when they come to the landing page, now there's more message, there's more information that we want to share with them. But what does that mean? Well, how do we measure that? Well, let's just say what we're really going to do here is we're going to identify what it is that we want people to do when they get to that landing page. Now, we already identified if I have an ad, I want you to click on it. I want you to click this link. I want you to click this on this ad. I want you to interact in some way. And once you do that, I want you to do something else, right? I want you to sign up for a product. I want you to give me your email address. I want you to buy something. I want you to learn something. I want you to watch a video, whatever it is. There's all these different points of contact and interaction that we want to include as part of our overall experience. So we can start to measure those things as well. And by the way, this is all built into most of the back ends for websites. And sometimes it's a little harder than others, but you can go in there and start to measure what it is people do when they get to these pages. So now we have a path. We have an understanding, okay, here's the people we're trying to reach. Are these the right people? Well, we'll hopefully find that out by seeing what kind of love we get. Second of all, is our message good? Are we able to stand out from the crowd? Well, once again, the response rate that we get is going to be indicative of how effective our overall message is. And finally, are we able to get them them being the consumer or the prospect or the people we're communicating with? Are we able to get them to do the things we want them to do? Hard to know unless we measure it. So we set these things up in the back end so that we can go in and identify if the video is being seen or if we're collecting the right number of email addresses, that kind of thing, right? So once again, I don't want to oversimplify the process because it's not a simple process and it's a lot harder than this in practice. But I want you to just get an understanding of some of the fundamentals of what need to take place in order for this to be an effective marketing thing. Bottom line, and I want you to walk away with this if nothing else, it's not a matter of spending money and putting ads up on websites. It's not a matter of spending money on a search campaign. It's not a matter of spending money on a television commercial, frankly. It's a matter of identifying who it is that you're trying to reach, identifying what it is you want to say to them, and then measuring what happens later, because you want to figure out from that experience what feedback that you're getting back is. Are you reaching the right people? Is your message resonating? And are people doing what you wanted them to do in the long run? Once again, if you go to spidergram.com, lots of training covering these areas, hours and hours of good stuff that will really give you a breakdown of this process. This is much more of an overview, but hopefully will whet your appetite and help point you in the right direction. Anyway, that's all I have for this broadcast. As always, thank you so much for joining me. This is Spider Graham, and I will talk to you real soon.
For more free resources and advice for entrepreneurs, visit spidergram.com and become a subscriber today.